writing that, exporting it as a PDF, and then attaching it to an email to send me. What is that? Just send the email.
Welcome to A Different Practice. We're your hosts, Lauren Lester and Jess Bednars, and we're obsessed with all things business, well-being, and optimizing the practice of law for solo and small firm lawyers. Lauren started her solo practice right out of law school, built it from the ground up, and now works 4 days a week while earning well over 6 figures. Jess approaches the profession as a whole to identify opportunities for growth and help implement systemic improvements. We're here to share tangible, concrete tools and resources for ditching the legal profession's antiquated approach and building a law practice optimized for growth and enjoyment. Think of this as grabbing coffee with your work besties mixed with all the stuff they didn't teach you in law school about how to run a business. Pull up a seat, grab a cup, and get ready to be encouraged and challenged. This is A Different Practice.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of A Different Practice. I'm excited for y'all to be here today. I've certainly loved our one-on-one chats and we've brought some guests in, but I am super excited today that we finally have with us our co-host, Jessica Bednars. Woo!
Hey, hey, hey.
Jess is joining us officially now. She will be here hopefully from here on out. So Jess, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
So why don't you give our wonderful listeners a little life update from you, where you've been, what you've been up to, and what you're looking forward to most.
So hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Bednars. I go by Jess, and I currently work at ILS, which stands for the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System. We are a research institute based at the University of Denver. We are a national organization, we're independent, and we're really working across all areas of the civil justice system, trying to continuously improve it. And I just started there in January. Prior to that, just really quickly, just to understand my perspective and where I'm coming from, I moved from Chicago and I worked at the Chicago Bar Foundation for a while. While I was there, I oversaw the legal incubator program there called the Justice Entrepreneurs Project, which is focused on helping lawyers who want to start socially conscious practices that are helping the everyday person launch those practices, and then also directing special projects that advance innovation in the practice of law. And then going even further back, I did practice family law at a small family law firm in Chicago for a bit. And then going all the way back, just like Lauren, I launched my own law firm right out of law school as well. So that's just a little bit about me. And the reason I'm joining a little bit late is because I did have a transition, this work transition back in January. And ILS just wanted some time to run some conflict and time checks and just make sure everything is all good. And lucky for all of us, it is all good. So here I am. And so excited to be joining this awesome podcast that you have started, Lauren. So what am I most looking forward to? I think having opportunity to chat with you and our listeners and just share any best practices that we've learned, any cool ideas that we've seen along the way, and hopefully learn stuff from our guests and from our listeners as well.
So Jess and I have known each other since 2015, when we both first moved to Colorado, and then she circled back eventually, which we're thrilled about. I think why we have a great dynamic is because I am much more boots on the ground in the weeds because I have my own practice, but because of your background, especially for the last several years, you've really seen it at a much more kind of macro level and seen how different practices and different practitioners have approached building a firm that is optimizing for well-being and also actually providing affordable legal services to the community. So it gives us a nice back and forth where it's not just my perspective, which I think is helpful for folks who want to hear like, well, how do you actually do it? One person's idea, but you have, well, I have actually talked to these different people and they've all done it these different ways. So it really gives us a nice balance in terms of perspective. And now definitely at ILS on a more national level even, which is great.
Totally agree.
Because today is kind of just a celebratory episode, we're just so happy to have Jess officially on board. We thought we'd do something a little more fun. And if you have seen this maybe on social media or maybe have talked about it with your friends, but there's kind of a trend going around where people talk about what they call their icks. So these aren't like red flags, like you're dating someone, you're like, oh, that's a red flag about that person. But these are just more like annoyances, kind of like things that get under your skin. Those things that sometimes make you just say like WTF, like what is going on here? And so we thought it might be fun to share some of our icks from the profession and being a member of the profession. And you might agree with some of these. And if you have your own, definitely be sure to share them with us, shoot us a comment on social media or leave us a voice memo or send an email, and we'll kind of compile all of our listeners' icks. I'm sure you all have some really good ones too. So Jess, why don't you kick us off and tell us what one of your icks is?
Awesome. Okay. So one of my icks is when someone else mismanages their time and then suddenly it becomes my problem. And let me just start out by saying, do I mismanage my time on occasion? Absolutely. I am not perfect, so I am guilty of this, at least on occasion. But I really try to make an effort to not do this. And so I think, and this is not just a lawyer problem either, so I'll just start there as well. I think there's a segment of the larger population that has this issue. And I think time management very much is a skill. It's something that can be learned and needs to be practiced. And I don't remember learning about time management really in law school, so I can't fault anyone necessarily for these things. However, I have taken some time personally to learn some ways to manage time. And so I've tried to implement those as much as possible on my end. And so when unfortunately something happens on another person's end and it trickles into my space, it's really frustrating to me. And the reason it's frustrating is because it feels a little disrespectful. And, I know there are probably many reasons why this could happen, some of which might just be pure emergency and someone couldn't plan around it. But I think most of the time it probably can be planned around. And so when someone does not manage their time and then suddenly they're showing up for a meeting with me or a bigger meeting and they're not prepared, so it can't be productive, it just really bothers me because now I've put in the time to prepare and now we're probably going to have to have another meeting about it. I'm going to put the time in again. So it just causes me to then have to spend extra time on whatever it is that we're talking about. So I don't know if you've had this happen to you, Lauren, but this is something that is definitely an ick for me.
I haven't had it as much with attorneys. Like if I have an opposing counsel not be totally prepared. I mean, I definitely have picked up the phone and like got the feeling that I had to remind the attorney like what case we're talking about. Like, oh, it's Jack and Sally. And they're like, oh, yeah. I clearly just caught them in their whirlwind. I haven't had like meetings where people don't show up because they just don't have those types of meetings. But I can definitely understand that would be really frustrating, especially when you've prepared and you just feel like you're wasting your time. Like this meeting is not going to be productive. Would you almost prefer, if that was the case, that the person own up to it and just cancel rather than have you sit there either for the whole meeting and try and like trudge your way through, or you get 15 minutes in and you're like, listen, we're not going to get anywhere today. Let's just reschedule?
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to do. And something that I really appreciate and respect, when somebody sends me an email anytime in advance of the meeting, just saying, hey, something's come up. I can't be at the meeting or I can't come prepared to the meeting. That's totally fine because I've only wasted 10 seconds reading your email. We reschedule that meeting really quickly and then we just move on, and that's totally fine. And I've done that to people too. So I think that's a great way to approach that and don't feel bad about it or shameful about it. Don't feel that way about sending that email. I think the person on the other end, more times than not, will really appreciate receiving it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this one reminds me of one of my icks, and I think it kind of dovetails, and it might be a time management issue. Sometimes I think it's strategy, which rubs me probably even more the wrong way, but it's getting the email at 3:05 p.m. from an opposing counsel that says, here is some issue. If you don't respond by 5, I'm going to XYZ. It's usually file some emergency motion or take some drastic action. I don't know about you, but I don't live in my email. So oftentimes I don't see that 3:05 email until like 4:45 when I happen to just be almost done for the day and run through to make sure like nothing's on fire. And then I see this, I have to respond in 15 minutes and I have to go talk to my client. And what if they're not available? And we have a conferral duty in Colorado. I'm sure a lot of states do. I think even if you don't, it's just a professionalism. Like we're trying to solve a problem here. So that's where I think sometimes maybe it is strategy. Like, let me just ask them at the last possible minute so they don't really have a chance to respond. But I can say I did confer and tell the court that. But it's really frustrating because I can't resolve it. And then some usually drastic action gets taken or some motion gets filed with the court that just inflames, especially in family law, the situation that probably could have been resolved if we just had a little bit more time. And sometimes there are emergency situations. So I'm not asking for 3 days, but like 24 hours or like at least a full business day, I think would be a lot nicer. And I wonder, and I don't know if you had this when you practice, Jess, or if you've heard it from other colleagues, like sometimes I think it's just bad time management. Like the client probably told them this 3 days ago, and then the attorney went, oh, shoot, I totally forgot about it. I need to deal with this. It's 3:00. Let me shoot that email off. We'll get it done by today. Like that probably happens. I'll give some attorneys the benefit of the doubt, but I really think it's like a strategy thing so that they can check off the box of conferring and trying to deal with it outside of court, but not really in good faith.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, either strategy or mismanagement of time. And the reason that I say that is because based on my experience, there's such a limited amount of true emergencies out there. Like, and if it's a true emergency, you should call the police. That's really who you should be calling. You shouldn't be sending an email. But unless your child has been abducted or something really serious has happened, it's not actually an emergency. It doesn't need to be taken care of in 2 hours. But let's just say it is. If it was a true emergency, I would imagine, or it seems like that person, in addition to sending an email, should call you, right? If it's truly that emergent, pick up the phone and call. I understand maybe you need to document an email. That's fine. But if they're not pairing it with something like that, it also just does really make me question, is this truly an emergency? And I also agree, most people don't live in their email. And if they are, they're not getting a lot done. So that's not good either. And it just seems unprofessional, right? If you really need something quickly, I feel like you should just pick up the phone and call someone if it's truly that important. So I agree. I think it's probably one of those two things.
Yeah. It's frustrating if it is a tactic, and it probably does work some of the times, maybe most of the time. It is what it is. There's a lot of tactics other attorneys use that I don't always agree with, but for me, taking the approach of like, let's solve the problem. It probably truly isn't an emergency. Let's not add fuel to the fire. I think that could go across the board in any adversarial type of practice, whether it's civil litigation or landlord tenant or whatever. Let's just try and maybe more work together to solve the problem than these little, like, I'm going to email them at 3 and then say they didn't get back to me. I mean, who is that really helping at the end of the day?
Yeah. And it just also feels irresponsible, frankly, because even if it's not a true emergency, I think it's hard. It could be hard to explain to your client that even though it's not an emergency, and it's okay, like we don't need to respond to this in 2 hours. I think it's hard to explain it to somebody who's already feeling very emotional and stressed and probably sees that. And even though they know it's not an emergency, feel the need to respond really quickly. So it just also puts you in a really bad spot. And it just probably adds to the stress and the cost of the matter overall, which is just not helpful.
And it goes back to your point of time management in general, of just kind of respecting the other professionals, the other people, the parties on the case. Like they have lives too, and they're not only dealing with this case, just like we're not only dealing with one case typically in our practices. Like we need to give folks some space, some like respect in their time, that they're not going to be able to necessarily jump on something just because we maybe forgot about it and are rushing to get it done last minute.
If we could just quash that one, that would be great.
Yes, we will solve all the problems of the profession.
This one's more important than my first egg, I will say.
Although still an ick, still annoying for sure.
Absolutely. All right, should we move on to my second ick?
Yeah. What's the next one?
Okay, so something that is definitely new for me is, so as you mentioned, and I mentioned, I work at Isles, before that, the Chicago Bar Foundation, and I'm out there oftentimes giving a lot of presentations, which is awesome. I love an opportunity to share ideas and connect with people on the ground who are doing the work, this very important work. Oftentimes, I'll learn things from people like you, other practitioners who are doing some really interesting and forward thinking and maybe seen as some outside of the box things. And so I'll share it, and I can tell, by looking at audience members and then talking with them afterwards, that some of these ideas really resonate with them. They seem very excited about it, but then almost immediately, like it's almost like there's a shift maybe in their minds or something like, this is really cool, but this couldn't work for me. This couldn't work in probate law because of X, Y, and Z. Not every case is the same. And, all the things. I think something similar happens. Oftentimes I'll give examples from other industries that apply to legal and that I've seen practitioners work into their practices quite successfully. But then the same thing happens. They hear that it's come from another industry and then almost immediately, oh, really cool, but I'm in legal and I have this special practice that has all these unique cases. And it's just really frustrating because we've talked about this through our pricing toolkit and other ways. Like, we recognize that every practice is different. We recognize that all cases are different. We're not trying to say that they're not, but what we are trying to say is that a lot of these concepts from other industries and from other practices and practice areas, they do translate across the board. And there's so much opportunity there to really get value out of it, both for yourself, but more importantly for your client. And so I don't know what the solution is. I try to do this in work. Everyone has those things that they really don't like to do. For example, like every time something comes up, you're like, oh God, I'm just bottom of the to-do list. Like, let's see how long I can push this off. Sometimes I try to challenge myself instead of doing that to really prioritize it. Like, I hate doing this, but guess what? I'm going to really lean into this today and I'm going to put a lot of effort into it. And maybe if I keep doing that, I'll hate it a lot less. And so we don't want practitioners to be doing anything they hate, but I would really challenge the average practitioner to, every time they hear something interesting, whether it be from another practitioner in another practice area, another industry, what have you, I'd really challenge them to just immediately think, yes, how can I make this work? As opposed to no. I know we're trained to identify risks as lawyers. That makes total sense to me. So sometimes we got to really push against that though, and push through it and say, you know what, I'm actually going to make this work. How would I do that? Doesn't mean you have to ultimately implement it, but really go down that rabbit hole and see if you can actually make it work. I think that's just kind of a good practice and just a good innovation practice. A lot of people, when they hear the word innovation, they think really transformative and really big ideas and big things. It doesn't have to be that way. And most ideas are not original ideas, right? They come from other industries. So a lot of the big things and inventions that have taken place over the past decade, century, et cetera, a lot of people who really are just looking to other industries, looking to other inventions and just making slight tweaks. That's how it usually is. And so I would really encourage the average practitioner to just try to adopt that type of mindset. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you can start doing that and practicing this on a daily basis, I think it'll change your mindset. And I just think you're really going to see a huge change in your practice as well.
As you were talking, it made me think of the principle or one of the core values of improv, which is totally not related to law, but as you were talking,
improv.
So their core belief is when somebody throws something out at you, which you don't know because it's improv, right? You respond with yes, and. Because I think a lot of our nature as humans is to go, yeah, but like you said, there's always a big but, and there's 15 excuses. So I wonder if another tool, in addition to forcing yourself just to try the new thing or the thing maybe that you're most resistant to, is even when somebody is saying an idea or you hear something, to catch yourself, but going, yeah, but that's not going to work in legal because blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's 100 excuses. Instead, say, yes, that's a great idea. And we can incorporate that into legal this way, or I can do that in my practice this way. Or even just, you said, starting with the thought process, like don't actually do anything yet. Just give your mind the freedom to go, well, what would that look like in my practice? And what if I did this? And like, just run with the thoughts and see if it's something that could be implemented in a small way to start, and then maybe potentially grow. But yeah, all of the innovation and improvements that have happened are usually just small incremental steps up, where someone said, let me make this slightly better. And then the next person came along and said, how can I make that slightly better? And we really don't have that mindset in legal because we're so trained to focus on risk and what could go wrong and how do you protect against those things. And we're really not celebrated when things are different. I mean, we deal with precedent and case law, right? Like we're not really set up to celebrate innovation, but we really desperately need it. So I think that's such a great thing that gets under my skin too, is like, just try it. Who cares? Like, what's the worst that could happen? But I do get that it's scary. And maybe if we take more of a yes and mentality, that would make a big difference.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, we're definitely trained to say no first. So it really is a shift, but I love this practical tip of just something very small, 2 words, yes, and something that you could even create a visual reminder for yourself. I'll do this sometimes. I'm a huge Post-it fan. So you could write yes, and on a Post-it, just put it right next to your workspace in an area where you'll see it often, and remind yourself, because it's almost like a habit that you need to build, and it's going to take some time to do that. You could get really crazy and write it on your hand. That could be fun, like the back of your hand.
And if anyone gets it tattooed, let us know.
Oh my God. That would be a whole new level, but yes, please do let us know. But yeah, I think that's super practical and something very easy that practitioners could play around with. Don't just do it for a day. I think you have to give it at least a week or two. I think for a habit, is it 6 weeks, 3 months? I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't know if there's specific time. I think James Clear talks about in his book that there's data from all over the place. Like some people say it's 21 days, some people say it's 6 months. So I think it just, however long it takes you to build it into your kind of subconscious. I think a lot of us came into law school maybe innately more risk averse. Like I'm generally a risk averse person, but law school certainly hammered that in. And so just in the same way that we learned to identify the risks and say no immediately, we can learn to do the opposite, or at least give ourselves a little bit more freedom to not immediately go there and shut down anything that's slightly different or new idea. My next one is when I have a case that I've entered an appearance on, and the other party doesn't have representation initially, so they're pro se, and then they get representation, which is generally a good thing. Depends on, I guess, who the representation is, but generally a good thing. But my ick is that the other attorney enters an appearance. And so in Colorado, we have e-filing. So I get an immediate notification, entry of appearance. And then there's like crickets. Like the other attorney says nothing to me. And I'm sitting there going, am I supposed to reach out? Like, this feels like this is not my responsibility. I've been on this case. You're coming in. Great. Welcome. So glad to have you here. But don't you go up and say, hi, what's been going on? Where can I help? What do we need to start with? Or whatever the issues that your client hasn't been able to express that you need to start working through. I mean, whatever it is, I just find that so weird. I had one recently and I just thought, I'm just going to wait. How long does it take them to say anything? And it was days. I mean, luckily we didn't have anything pressing going on, and maybe that's why they don't say anything. It's just weird to me. I feel like it's like somebody walks into your house and just like sits down on the couch and you're like, hi, like, why are you here? Like, I just find it really odd. And I think it goes back to that like level of respect, kind of like we're two colleagues. You can't even shoot an email saying, hey, I just jumped on the case. Even if you don't have anything pressing, like I know nothing's going on right now, but just wanted to introduce myself. Let me know if you need something. I mean, I do that when I enter an appearance and I see someone's already on the case of just, I'm going to reach out and say, hi, what do you need? What can I do? Here are the things I'm working on. And to just get like crickets is really strange to me.
I totally agree. I had a slightly less intrusive visual in my head, like maybe I'm at a networking event or just a regular event, whatever. And it's, three of us chatting and some other person comes up and joins our group, but then just stands there.
Right.
Which
and says nothing.
Yeah. And says nothing. Right. Just says nothing. Which would be really strange. And yeah, like if I were walking into a group, I would be like, hi, I would introduce myself. And yeah, I can't think of a good reason not to do that. I do really believe the ball is in the newly entering attorney's court in this situation. I didn't have that happen as much when I practiced, but I would have the same expectation. And I agree. It just kind of falls under professionalism. It seems like the type of thing you wouldn't have to actually tell people either.
That's what I thought. But then I started experiencing it and thought, am I crazy? Is it me? Then you go to is it me? Am I supposed to do extra here?
I don't know. Maybe it's been a while since I've attended a professionalism and civility CLE, but perhaps this is something we need to be talking about more. Or maybe this needs to be in the new lawyer training that all new lawyers have to take. Again, seems strange that you would have to point this out, but I am learning these days there are more and more things like that where I make assumptions about how people think about things and they're turning out to be incorrect. And so I'm trying to do that less. I try not to make assumptions as much as possible, just generally, but definitely in kind of the communication space, I've experienced this a lot recently. So I think it is good to talk about this and get this out there because not everyone knows.
So if anyone's listening and is in that space of teaching professionalism or can have some influence, we would like to put a virtual card in your suggestion box that one small thing folks can do is say hi when you enter on a case, and just don't be that person who walks up to the networking event and says nothing.
Yeah. And I feel like when you really paint a visual and offer an analogy like that, I think it really hits home in a way that it doesn't otherwise. So maybe when talking about it, pair it with a story like that. And then I think people will get it.
Yeah, for sure.
As I mentioned, I recently switched jobs. And so if any of you have worked for someone else, you may have had this happen to you where I'm going around and in various situations, people knew the person who was in the position before me. And they're like, oh, great, you're the new so-and-so, the new insert name here. So the previous person in my position was not named Lauren, but I will use that name. Oh, great, you're the new Lauren. And I think people say that with good intention. Oftentimes they really liked Lauren or the person who was in the position before. So I think they're seeing it very complimentary and as a good way to, just get the conversation started. But for me, the way this feels sometimes, and this isn't a giant ick, it's just one of those things where when someone does it, I'm like, ugh. And the person who was in this position before me is a great person. So I will gladly accept those compliments. But what it feels to me is it's almost like they put you in a box of however that person was. And I don't mean necessarily a bad box, but just they're now, in my mind, it feels like they're seeing you as a new version of that old person. And it's just not right because every person is different. They have different strengths and weaknesses, different experiences and backgrounds. And I don't want to be the new anyone ever. I just want to be myself and given the opportunity to bring all of my experience to the position and just do the best I can in it. And I don't want to be seen as someone else in any other way. I want to be my own person and kind of start from scratch. And it's kind of silly, but it has come up and I just wanted to point it out. And I think instead, just say, and if someone's introducing you too, you could say, oh, this is the new insert position title here. You don't have to say oh, this is the new Lauren. This is the new director of legal services in the profession. And instead, if you're walking into a conversation like that, you'd be like, oh, great, you're the new director of legal services in the profession. And if you want to say something about the previous person, do it. I really enjoyed working with Lauren. She was so great in that position. That's awesome. That person deserves that praise and might provide some context for you going forward. But again, know the new whoever, just the person and the title. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like you said it, might be a small one in the grand scheme, maybe, but the sand in your eye, like just because it's small doesn't mean it's not important or doesn't speak to bigger things. And I wonder if that goes back to the beginning of our conversation a little bit about just kind of respect for our colleagues, that they're individual people and they bring their own talents and experience and gifts to the table, and that should be recognized. And then also, when you say like, this is the new Lauren, and kind of put that box, good or bad, around the person, I wonder if that feeds into us as a profession of just not liking change. It'd be a lot easier for that colleague who's used to Lauren and how she works to be just like that, because then they don't have to get used to a new person. And I wonder if it, like, in an almost subconscious way, I don't think that's what anyone is intentionally doing, but I think it goes back to, we're just so trained of like, oh, that's change. We don't like that. Like, how can we make it similar to the way it was? Because that's what we're used to. We do that as humans, just in general, but we definitely do it in the legal profession. I wonder if it's kind of like that too, where it really restricts you in your new role and doesn't allow for as much growth or new thinking, because someone who feels like, oh, now I've got to kind of morph myself into this persona of this person who left, who might have been amazing, but they're different, really limits the new person to be into their full potential.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I do think there's I don't think mindset's the right word, but that element to this to some degree for sure. And then what I was going to add, which is right, I think kind of where you landed, is that many of us already struggle with imposter syndrome. And so when people are comparing you to someone, especially someone who's been there a really long time, potentially, and labeling you as the new them, that could feel very burdensome and overwhelming, because you're immediately probably going to think of the version of them when they left and not the version of them when they started in that position, which was probably very similar to where you're starting. But that's just what a lot of us naturally do. And so I think it does also inadvertently add some pressure there, at least in the moment, that none of us really need. It's just not productive.
Yeah, I think we just have to do a better job across the board. I mean, I fall into this trap too, of just holding space for people as they are. And that's not an invitation to just accept and nobody has the opportunity to grow and there's no constructive feedback, or, hey, you did that really great, but maybe we could do it a little bit better next time. I mean, there's always growth opportunities, but you start from where they are versus limiting them or making them feel like, oh, I've got to show up as this type of person. That's not me. And that's really hard. We have so many people in our profession who don't feel like they can show up as their authentic selves. I mean, we had a whole episode about that with Ryan Payton, which was so fantastic. So go back and listen to it. I think it's episode 3. Like, that's a trend in our profession. And I wonder if this is a smaller example, and it's not anything about sort of who you are as a person in terms of your demographics or beliefs or anything like that, but it's still in that same kind of vein of who you are needs to be a little bit different because we're used to this other person who had this role, and we're not really rolling out the welcome mat and allowing you to show up as you are, to take this position to a better level because you were hired probably for a damn good reason, that the company thought you were going to do a great job. And so let the person do that. My last take is way less like motivational, inspirational, like we can do better than yours, but I don't get it. Maybe this is the old school mentality. The attachment of a PDF letter, like old school format with the address and the date and the like you learned in 7th grade, writing that, exporting it as a PDF, and then attaching it to an email to send me. What is that? Just send the email. I've had this happen a few times, and I love y'all, but it was from lawyers who have been around a minute. They have been practicing. They have tons of experience. Respect the heck out of them. Why are you emailing me a letter? Like, just just tell me what's wrong. I'll fix it.
So just to be crystal clear, you are suggesting or saying that your preference would be to take the content of the letter and just put it in the body of the email.
Exactly.
Correct. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for helping me clarify in my annoyance, my big ick. Yes. I can't see clearly. I'm so like, what is going on here?
Well, so 2 comments. One, so when I practiced, which was probably about 10 years ago at this point, but there definitely were still situations where we were actually typing out, not typing typewriter, but drafting letters and putting them in an envelope and mailing them. And so we did go to a point where we got to a point where we're at your ick, where instead of mailing the envelope, we just attached it via email, which to me was an improvement. It was much better than actually like printing the letter, putting it in an envelope, using postage, in Chicago, literally sending it like down the block, sometimes in the same building. Like, that's just bonkers, right? So it might sound shocking to say, at least 10 years ago, that was actually a step forward. But I agree, at this point in time, we should just ditch the letter and put the content of the letter in the email. I think at this point, we're to a point with the profession where that is an acceptable form of communication that would, if needed, if you printed that off and used it as evidence in a pleading or motion of some sort, that would be accepted. It does not need to be in a letter with, letterhead and all of that. That's right?
Yeah, I think so. And honestly, if it makes you feel better and you really want to send me a letter, send me the letter, but also put it in the email. Yeah. Like, attaching it to the email, I don't get the benefit other than it's like a fast mail, I guess. Like, instead of sticking it in the mailbox, it gets there quicker. I don't know. But the email has a little bit of text in it. It's not like see attached. It's like a summary, please find. And in this case, it was like a deficiency for our financial disclosure requirement. But I was like, just send me the deficiencies. What did the client not provide? Just tell me, I'll get it. Like, I don't need a formal letter attached. It's just odd. It feels like a clash of old school way we do things, like folks who every once in a while ask me if I have a fax machine. No, like, I don't, who faxes. So there's still some folks who that's just how they've practiced. So again, like, no knock to them. It's just, can we just move a little bit more into this century and not be so inefficient?
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe that's something that just needs to be said too. So now we're on the other end of the spectrum. The people have been practicing a little bit longer. Like, hey, everyone, just so you know, now this is an acceptable form of communication with the courts. You don't need to do this. Yes, attaching the letter does get it there faster than mailing it. It does save some postage. I guess it's more environmentally friendly, all of those things. So those are all good things. But guess what? Now you don't even need to do that. You can just put the text of the letter in the email. This is probably not a selling point for attorneys who bill by the hour, but then it also just takes less time, which means less money that you have to bill to your client, which the clients would really appreciate.
Yes.
We will always promote set fees. We think you should do it that way. So then if you're offering set fees, this only increases your value and your profits, but discussion for another day. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I wanted to bring up one related thing here, and I'm not sure about your thoughts on it. And it's changing a little bit now that we're using technology to create and send and sign engagement agreements, which is all great. But when I was practicing, it was always curious to me why we called it engagement. So sometimes it's an engagement letter, sometimes it's an engagement agreement, right? We all mean the same thing, I think, when we're using those terms interchangeably. I always thought the engagement letter, though, was just a little strange. And it was always in a letter form. So an engagement agreement's a contract, right? That's what it is. Most people would start out writing a letter to their client and then include these terms in the letter. And then that was kind of the engagement letter. And it wasn't really a separate contract. And I always thought that was weird because I always look at letters, and I know not all letters are nice, but when I think about drafting a letter dear so-and-so, I'm not thinking about inserting contractual agreement or provisions in the letter. That to me also seemed like a clash. But also I think it could be really confusing to clients when they're receiving something that's contractual in a more, well, and obviously these days people don't write letters at all, so maybe it doesn't matter. It's probably an outdated complaint, but before social media and all of these things and text messaging, whatever, I feel like it could be confusing to receive provisions of a contract in a letter format. Like, is this actually a contract? Is this a letter? Are we just communicating? I think a lot of times you already have a hard time getting on the same page with the client. I feel like that always just muddled it. So I never did that. Like, I just created an actual contract without the letter. And I would just talk to them about it and have them sign that. So there was just no confusion about it. And I just always thought that was really strange. I didn't get it. I don't know if you ever did that or if you have thoughts on this, but when I heard that, it just made this light bulb go off.
I think clear communication is key. I think calling it an engagement agreement is critical. I think the letter piece, like, yes, does the client understand this is a contract they're entering into? There's some ambiguity there. But to be honest, my engagement agreements kind of start out as letters. Oh my gosh, I'm one of your icks. So now I'm going to go back and look at it because now I'm like, yeah, you're kind of right. Like, I wonder if they get it. I call mine engagement agreements. So I always tell them I'm going to send you an engagement agreement and they sign it, which I also think, correct me if I'm wrong, that there was a time when the engagement letter wasn't signed by the client. So that even more so is like, do they realize these are the terms that they're being bound to? But my clients sign my engagement agreements, but it is kind of written like a letter. And I think for me, part of that is there's a little trust and camaraderie being built. So like the beginning of it is like, thanks for choosing my law firm. And here's what we talked about. And I'm going to help you reach your goals. And these are your goals. So it is a little more conversational, where I think that's kind of the letter piece. But then it goes into like fees and costs and communication requirements and file retention and all the sections that I have in my contract language. I think it's a fair point. I'm now going to go look at mine to make sure I'm not being confusing. But I think your point of clear communication, especially in the beginning, especially around the terms of the engagement, is critical. So it's just a reminder to take a step back and go, am I being as clear as I can be?
And to be clear, I have not, taken an engagement letter, an engagement agreement, and gone around and surveyed legal consumers on which one is more clear than the other. So this is just my thing at this point, but it is something to consider. I don't know, but just something that kind of makes me laugh. Like, not really an ick, just something to me that always seemed a little weird.
Makes you smile.
Yes.
To our wonderful listeners, let us know. I mean, we're just two voices here. Send us a social media message or send us an email at hello@adifferentpractice.com or leave us a voicemail and let us know, A, do you have any icks that we missed? Share with us your icks. We would love to hear them. And B, on this issue of engagement agreements or engagement letters or fee agreements, they've got all different kinds of names. How do you approach it? Is it a little bit more like a letter, or is it a little bit more on the contract side? And if you pull pieces from each, what pieces do you pull and why? I'm really curious to hear what other folks are doing, because I think this maybe is a good discussion we should continue to have.
I can't wait to hear what people have to say. My guess is people are doing both for sure. I'm just curious to see like what the percentages are.
Yeah, so definitely share with us. Thanks to everyone for listening. Again, we're so happy to have Jess on board officially. We will see you next time. Have a great rest of your day or evening whenever you are listening to this. Until next time, keep building.
Bye, everyone.
We're over here giving you a virtual high five because you just finished another episode of A Different Practice. For more from this episode, head over to adifferentpractice.com/podcast for our show notes. If you found this episode helpful, we'd love it if you'd share it with someone. Be sure to rate the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you're looking for even more practical tools to optimize your law practice for growth and enjoyment, sign up for our monthly newsletter at adifferentpractice.com/subscribe. We can't wait to connect with you next time. Until then, keep building a different practice.